I like to get my news little paper together first, and when I came across this particular one from this week, as I kept writing, and I kept writing. So I thought, I'm going to just have to stick to this one thing this week. So we're not doing any Matthew 25 parables this week. And at first this seems, Israel is the key to the timeline. If you know what's going on there and why and all that, you'll have a really better idea of where we are and what's coming, instead of just making statements and sticking to it, and then people say, well, why, and you can't really give them an answer. So this past week, I came across this news item, and the title, the heading was, Obama pushing Israel to vacate the Jordan Valley. And the first paragraph in it said, the Obama administration is pressing hard for Israel to give up the strategic Jordan Valley in a deal with the Palestinians. Obama wants international forces to maintain security control along with unarmed Palestinian police forces, which is a joke, while Israel would retain security posts in some of the strategic areas of the Jordan Valley. Secretary of State John Kerry is urging an all-encompassing final status deal on the Jordan Valley. And of course, that's the West Bank.
Yeah. I was going to say, where is that?
Jordan Valley lies
Down into-
between
Oh, up there.
Tiberias, Lake Kinneret, to the Dead Sea. Where's the Dead Sea?
Wow.
It's this whole border.
And what's on the other side of that?
It's Jordan.
This is Jordan.
Okay, it's Jordan.
Is that the land that they won in the war, the last war?
Yeah.
Where's Palestinians at?
The
Where's Palestine?
67 war, they took it all,
They took Jerusalem and the West
everything.
Bank. Everything. They didn't have it
Yep, this
before.
is Jordan, that's Syria, Lebanon, and the Mediterranean. And right here, where's the Tanya? Okay, you see this area with the yellow and brown? That's the West, that's all part of the West Bank. Only Israel doesn't call it the West Bank. They call it, only for news source purposes, they call it Judea and Samaria. And it was settled by Orthodox Jews in these Jewish settlements because they say it's our biblical land. So we're going to settle it. So they're there. And over time, these areas that are yellow and brown, they're still under Israeli security, but they've given autonomy over to them to try to police themselves. Well, you know how that might go. So there's why there's a fence that runs down all the way the whole length of the country now, which we'll get to in here. Okay, Secretary of State John Kerry is urging an all-encompassing final status deal in the Jordan Valley, which is the West Bank, and sections of Jerusalem, including the Temple Mount. Kerry wants Israel to evacuate about, Kerry wants Israel to evacuate about 90% of its Jewish communities currently located in that territory. But Israel has rejected a Palestinian request that Prime Minister Netanyahu agrees not to place this agreement Kerry wants, or the final peace plan up for referendum in the Knesset. And there's a reason for that. The Palestinians don't want this to go to a Knesset vote. And you'll find out why later, the real underlying
What's
reason.
the Knesset?
The Knesset is their parliament, their
Oh, okay.
legislation. Meanwhile, Jordan has been invited to play a key role in, this is still part of the news article. Jordan has been invited to play a key role in the discussions surrounding both the Temple Mount and Jerusalem, but it will be the PA, or the Palestinian Authority, with some Jordanian assistance that would ultimately receive control of those areas. Back in 2007, it was reported that Jordan had been quietly purchasing real estate surrounding the Temple Mount in Jerusalem, hoping to gain more control over the area accessing the holy site. So in East Jerusalem, which is mainly Arab, they've been trying to buy up everything they can. And even though they don't have the right of return, they can't, they're not coming back in. Their birth rate is exploding because the more they have in those areas, legally they're there. I mean, they're even Israeli citizens, even though they're Arabs, because they work there and they have a home there and whatever. The birth rate is soaring because they're trying to outpace the Israelis, who have become so westernized that they have 1 or 2 kids. So, I don't know if I mentioned this before, but there's a new policy in Israel they just started, trying to encourage young Israelis to have bigger families. If you get pregnant and have a child, from the time of birth to 3 years old, you get your diapers free, you get your checkups free, the baby's taken totally care of free, food, medicine, clothing, everything.
Quite an incentive.
Yeah.
We want you to have kids.
Wow.
And when the child reaches 3, they go in, they reevaluate everything, they check their health and everything, and they give them another voucher from 3 to 6 years old. And then they kind of go, it tapers off. But to get these families to have more children, they're actually paying you to do it.
Wow.
Just to try to keep pace. Well, they're never going to keep pace with the Palestinians because they just have them one right after the other. But this is their way of trying to take over an area that they don't have a gun to go in and take. So we'll have a whole bunch of kids and overrun the place. So let's look back for a minute about this idea of a referendum in the Knesset. Can you think of any idea why the Palestinians don't want there to be a referendum in the Knesset?
Okay, what's a referendum?
A referendum is to take a vote when everybody's in agreement with it. We want it to go through. And what Kerry wants to go through is the final status deal on the Jordan Valley and West Bank and sections of Jerusalem. It's to cover up their lie-in negotiations. They know if something is presented to them, and you'll see this clear as I'm going through, if something's presented to them and they agree to it, if it goes up for Knesset vote, then you're kind of stuck. So they don't want it to go to Knesset. They don't want it to go there. The Knesset voted for the Oslo Accords. Now you know where that got Israel. So they want to keep it on the negotiating table. They don't want anything solidly set down in writing that they're going to have to come through for, even though they wouldn't come through anyway. But they don't want that problem. So, so let's look back for another minute to where this began and why. Remember, why the Oslo Accord was a dress rehearsal for the 70th week of Daniel. Remember we talked about that? Because 1993, being a Sabbath year belonging to the previous cycle, and everything in the timeline's based on sabbatical cycles. When, from 93 to 2000, that was still outside the, what? 7th day. Because in 2000, the ending of the 6,000 years, or 6th day, came to a stop. The 7th day began. The 7th day being without morning and evening and an end or anything. It just continues on. So, I used my train of thought for a second. So it was a dress rehearsal in the sense that in 1993, when the Oslo Accords were presented to the world, it was outside the timeline, but it was the first time that there was a land for peace agreement involving Israel and the Arabs. The first time ever, a land for peace agreement. Because the 7th day had not arrived yet, and that 93 to 2000 was outside of that time, previous to that time, it had to be a dress rehearsal. And we can see this because everything that's come down since 1993 with the Oslo Accords, no matter what they've called it, the Roadmap for Peace, there's all kind of names they've given it, it's still the same Oslo Accord. There's really no change. And that whole time period from 1993 to 2000, I could print out and show you the number of meetings and summits and everything they had all through those 7 years. But nothing changed. I mean, it was Jacob working for his desire, right? Peace. Well, it was a lie to agreement. There wasn't no peace that ever came out. So, Oslo was the first time there was ever any negotiations between Israel and her enemies for land for peace. It was presented to the world on Rosh Hashanah. Forgive me for repeating, but I have to do that to reinforce my own mind and what I'm getting at. So, it came at the very beginning of the last sabbatical cycle that would end the 6th day and begin the 7th day. The 1993 Oslo Accord had many flaws in this peace. The reason I'm bringing this to you, it might sound dry, but I'm trying to tie in the timeline, what we're seeing in the timeline that we've created, to what's happening in the news and why. Because so many times you read it, but you don't understand really why or what started it. So I don't mean to bore you with the details.
Not boring.
No.
The 1993 Oslo Accord had many flaws in this peace process, but basically it came down to this. Israel cannot compel, this was stated in a news article, Israel cannot compel good faith on the Arab side, nor can it ensure mature political leadership there. We know for sure that the peace process means withdrawals by Israel. We do not know for sure whether it will produce peace, or even whether both sides actually intend that it do so. So remember what we said about the Oslo Accord being the foundation for the 70th week of Daniel in the confirming the covenant? The Oslo is the covenant. It's not the only covenant. There's still the Abrahamic covenant. But Oslo is going to be a resurrection of that peace agreement, land for peace, that the Antichrist is going to confirm with many. And we see this for the last years now, since '93, that it's still there. It comes up constantly in the news reports, this Oslo Accord
20 years.
business. And you're going to be amazed at one thing in a second. So, all of the subsequent negotiations and attempts at resurrecting a land for peace agreement have failed. But they have remained in the news for the last 20 years since Oslo, 1993 to 2013. Exactly 20 years, this past Rosh Hashanah. Does that figure, 20 years, stir up an important memory? How about Genesis 31:38? Jacob said to Laban, "This 20 years I have been with thee." How about verse 41? "Thus have I been 20 years in thy house. I served thee 14 years for thy 2 daughters, and 6 years for thy cattle, and thou hast changed my wages 10 times. 20 years. How does that tie in? If Jacob had fulfilled 20 years of his 3 weeks of Jacob's trouble, how many years were left of those 3 weeks, or 21 years, before his deliverance, before he went back to the land of his father? 1 year.
1 year.
1 year.
2014.
So,
2014 spring is coming up too.
So, if the 7th day began in the year 2000, in a Sabbath year belonging to the previous cycle, and a new sabbatical cycle began in 2001, and that analogy would show there was to be 3 weeks from 3 weeks of years from 2001, and we've already used up almost 2 full weeks, or 13 years. How much time is left week-wise until Jacob is delivered? 1 week. 1 week. 7 years, the 70th week of Daniel. Plus this last remaining 1 year of the second week of Jacob's trouble. You see how it ties in? Time-wise, the 20 years, we need 21 to get out of it. We've got another year to go before the 70th week begins. And the 70th week started at, 3 weeks started at 2000. So if we put all that together, 1 week to go. So, well, you just can't make that up. It's exactly the same analogy. So, do I think that we're on the right track on the timeline? Yep, I sure do. Until something comes along that makes me change that idea, I'm sticking with it, because it's right on the mark so far. Now, returning to the Oslo Accord, 1993 to 2000, and remembering that week, or 7 years, was simply a dress rehearsal for the coming third week of Jacob's trouble, the 70th week of Daniel, we can understand why nothing has changed since then. It was a dress rehearsal. It's going to be in the news. It's going to come back. It's going to come back to haunt. So I want to start from 1993, when the original Land for Peace started, and take you through the timeline up to now. It's just little things for each year. In May, and you're going to get a really good picture of what Israel's had to put up with. I know you know to keep up with the news and all that, but unless all this comes together, I was amazed when I was typing it, because it was like, you know, it hits you how much they've had to deal with. In May 1994, keep in mind, September 1993 was the Oslo Accords presented to the world. A year later, not even a year later, May 1994, there was the Gaza-Jericho Agreement under Oslo I. Israel would withdraw from Gaza, this is the proposal, and Jericho as the first step in the peace process. This was only a year into it now. They did not withdraw the Jewish settlements at that time, but remained responsible for them while turning over internal security to the Palestinians, which means policing themselves, which they did a lousy job of, along with Israel releasing 5,000 Palestinians who were in jail. In September 1995, another year later, there was the interim agreement on West Bank and Gaza under Oslo II. It was signed by Yitzhak Rabin and Arafat. It was the second major step in the Oslo process. It again split up the responsibility for the West Bank into divided areas under Israeli and Palestinian control. That's when you started seeing these autonomous sections. And yellow means, yellow means it's Palestinian territory, but it's under Israeli security. And the brown ones are, it's Israeli territory, but it's under Palestinian control. It's called A and B. They have maps that are just color-coded that you can see, like this area here would have so many Israeli settlements in it, but it was actually under Palestinian control. But this area over here in yellow might actually have more of the Palestinians settlements living there that Israeli had control. So it got really complicated, and even the lines, the green line they call it, before the 67 war, some of them we followed. It's actually, they have actually a line painted in some of the areas right through Jerusalem. You walk down the street and there's these very nicely kept Israeli homes, all stone, like almost like townhouses, but they're old. And on this side, and it's clean and well kept, and on this side of the street it looks like a ghetto. And there is a green line painted along the curb, because that was given to the Palestinians, ghetto land we called it when we went through it, because in the street garbage and broken glass. And on this side is Israeli territory, on the same street. So it got really, really complicated because some places where it went through during the war, some of the buildings were just pockmarked with bullets, and nobody ever fixed them back up when it was on the Palestinians. So it's like if you look this way, it looks, oh, I'm in Israel, and you look this way, and it's like I'm in a war zone. And I saw that there. And we actually went on a walking tour of it, following the green line to this neighborhood. So, okay, January 1996, I couldn't find really where anything major was happening. So I went to January 1997, the Hebron Accord. Israel transferred control of Hebron to the Palestinian Authority, even though there were more than 400 Jewish settlements living among the 130,000 Palestinians that were there. Jewish settlers felt betrayed. They had settled what they believed, and rightly so, was the biblical lands of Judea and Samaria. The Palestinians cheered. Even today, you still hear in the news of Jews being attacked as they go to visit the shrine of the tomb of the patriarchs in Hebron. Buried there are Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Sarah, Rebekah, and Leah. The only matriarch missing is Rachel, who is believed to be buried near Bethlehem, where she died in childbirth. In fact, Harold and I were there on a Sunday. I actually brought up the news article that I read when we were over there. Harold and I were there on a Sunday on February 21st, 2010, when it was announced that Israel would add the cave of the patriarchs in Hebron and Rachel's tomb in nearby Bethlehem to its list of national heritage sites. I think I might have even already told you about this. The move angered the Palestinians, who want Israel out of the territory totally. The Palestinians knew this was coming and had prepared for the riots in Hebron and the stone throwing when Israeli soldiers securing the Temple Mount, because there were wheelbarrows full of stones on the Temple Mount waiting for the right moment. Harold and I were at the wall walking toward the Temple Mount. We were going to go up there. You have to go up between certain morning hours, after they're done praying. So Harold and I were actually walking up. We were at the wall, going to go up that incline to go on the Temple Mount, when we heard the gunshots. They use rubber bullets, though. And yelling, and people flying down off the Temple Mount. They were pouring out. That's when we met this Dutch girl who was sitting on the bench panting, and I said, what is going on? And she says, can't go up, can't go up. She said, they're hollering, go, 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 go. So this is what it was about. They were lying in wait, already prepared to have a riot, because they knew that Israel was going to declare the Hebron tomb of the patriots and Rachel's tomb one of the National Historic Register. So the soldiers were screaming at the people to go, go, go. So we didn't get to go up that morning. Okay, October 1998, the Wye River Agreement. Do you remember Annapolis? With increasing violence, President Clinton pushed to get Israeli and Palestinian leaders to make good on the promises made 5 years earlier in Oslo. The U.S. convened a summit at Annapolis between Clinton, Arafat, and Ehud Barak, under Netanyahu, who was the prime minister then. At that time, Barak offered up another 13% of the West Bank territory, but Arafat would not agree to it. He just offered it to him without any other conditions, and he said no. It was in 2003 when I was on a trip with a small Jewish group affiliated with the United Jewish Federation. I told you about that before. It was just all Jewish people who were big givers. And we were invited to the home of an influential government official for dinner. The money people were there to schmooze with the power people. That's what it was all about. It was fascinating and eye-opening. one of the men present happened to be, I sat next to him at the dinner, happened to be the assistant to Ehud Barak during the time of the Y agreement. I forget what his name was now. Elon something. I asked him why Barak had offered such a big chunk of the West Bank to Arafat, and he smiled, and he said, it was what we call the carousel tactic. And he laughed. I said, well, what kind of tactic is that? And he said, carousel, like you say, merry-go-round?
Yeah, just going around.
He said, we keep going round and round and round, offering, negotiating, knowing whatever the conclusions are, it will all be up for, guess what, referendum in the Knesset. Who will vote it down? So it was nothing but a save face. We're going to give you 13% of the West Bank, Arafat. He knew. This guy told me, he actually wrote some of the demands to be negotiated. And he said, but we would have offered 85% because we knew that Knesset would say no. That's why Albus doesn't want anything to go to the Knesset anyway. So it's still in the news, it's still going on, it's still the merry-go-round. They're all still on the merry-go-round. So it's no different. The Palestinian request that Prime Minister Netanyahu agreed not to place this or the final peace plan up for referendum in the Knesset. Why? Because whatever old Abbas knows what will happen, it will be defeated in the Knesset. And the beat goes on. I keep thinking of that song all the time. Cher and
Yeah.
Sonny.
Funny, Cher.
So now we're up to September 1999. Sharm el-Sheikh Memorandum, signed by Yasser Arafat and the new Prime Minister, Ehud Barak. One of the reasons Netanyahu was defeated by Barak in the elections was because Netanyahu was set against the Oslo Accords to begin with. He hated it. He knew it wasn't fair. And he stated as much. So Netanyahu was generally seen in Israel at that time as a man not wanting peace. Anyway, the Sharm el-Sheikh Agreement outlined a bold framework and timetable for a final status peace agreement. The West Bank, here we go, we're still in the West Bank, all this time later. The West Bank would be given to the Palestinians in 3 land transfers until 40% of the West Bank would be under Palestinian control. Also, and I got this in caps, final status negotiations would be due in mid-February 2000. Now we're up to Camp David, July 2000. Barak wanted to skip the interim agreements because he became prime minister. He wanted to skip all those interim agreements that they had made during the Y agreement, which never came to fruition anyway. So he pushed Clinton for a summit which would institute a 2-state solution. So here we go with the 2-state solution, part of Oslo, because that was originally what it was going to be about anyway, and hoping it would end the conflict. Barak and Clinton suggested a path-breaking plan permitting a Palestinian state with a capital in Jerusalem. But the Palestinians criticized Barak for coming to Camp David with a proposal for dividing the West Bank they had already rejected. It doesn't make sense, because you know why? They just want Israel out of there. They don't want part of anything. They want it all. In their eyes, the Clinton-Barak plan would have left the new Palestinian state with significant loss of water and good land, almost split by Israeli annexation running east from Jerusalem, and with Israel getting roughly 9% of the West Bank. They still turned it down. However, the U.S. and Israeli officials contend that throughout the summit, the Palestinians rejected Israeli proposals while offering no proposal of their own. Publicly, both Clinton and Barak blamed Arafat for the failure to reach an agreement on a 2-state solution. Despite the setback, however, Arafat and Barak approved a new series of secret meetings between the negotiators over the following months. So now we're up to September 2000. Significant. Ariel Sharon, he was not the prime minister when this happened. Some people think he was already prime minister when he went up on the Temple Mount, but he wasn't. Ariel Sharon had opposed Israel's 1993 signing of the Oslo Accord. In 2000, he was not yet elected prime minister. That would happen 5 months later in February 2001. But on Rosh Hashanah of the Sabbath year 2000, 1,000 security officers provided protection when Sharon visited the Temple Mount. Why did Sharon go up to the Temple Mount, not even being prime minister? Was it a provocation? Yes. He stated, "The Temple Mount is in our hands and will remain in our hands." But the Palestinian Authority communications minister admitted months after Sharon's visit that the violence had been planned in July, far in advance of Sharon's provocation. It had been planned since Arafat's return from Camp David, when he turned the tables on Clinton and Barak and rejected all conditions. So he was offered the West Bank, a good chunk of it. He turned it down because he really wanted it all. And he goes back and he plans the Intifada. Don't you think Israeli intelligence knew all that? And why Sharon went up there anyway? It was just bringing it to a head. That's all it did. What else happened on Rosh Hashanah 2000? The ending of the sixth day, 6,000 years. The announcement of the Israeli rabbis that we have entered the time of Jacob's trouble. And it was the beginning of the seventh day, the Sabbath day, the Lord's day. So now we're in January 2001. The Taba talks. In the desperate attempt to salvage the peace effort before Israel's election, and because Ariel Sharon was forecast to defeat Barak, negotiators met in the Egyptian resort of Taba, focusing on new parameters for an agreement which had been developed by Clinton in December. The new terms went further than what Israel and the U.S. had offered at Camp David. After a week of on-off negotiations, Palestinian and Israeli negotiators announced they had never been more close to reaching an agreement on final status issues, but they had run out of political time. Boo-hoo. They couldn't conclude an agreement with Clinton, who was now out of office. It's January. He's gone. And Barak standing for re-election in 2 weeks. So the chief Palestinian negotiator said, "My heart aches," this is a quote, "my heart aches because I know we were so close. We need 6 more weeks to conclude the drafting of the agreement." The truth is, in these headlines that followed, my heart aches, and perhaps you'll remember some of these. 1. The outbreak of violence in late 2000 was provoked by Ariel Sharon's visit to the Temple Mount. These were headlines. 2. A handful of Israelis have been killed in the uprising, while thousands of innocent Palestinians have been murdered by Israeli troops.
Oh, goodness.
These are actual headlines.
I know.
3, and not just in Al Jazeera. 3, violence is an understandable and legitimate reaction to Israel's policies. 4, the Al-Aqsa uprising has been conducted only in the disputed territories and has had no impact on Israel. 5, Israel uses excessive force to respond to children who are just throwing stones. 6, the Palestinian Authority is acting to prevent violence by arresting terrorists and confiscating illegal weapons. Really? 7, the shooting of a child being protected by his father, shown on TV, proves Israel does not hesitate to kill innocent Palestinian children. You remember that? I saw the actual footage. And it was in the newspaper, and